here we go with another church father crossover. This one comes to mind again, but a time is coming when men will go mad, and when they see someone who is not mad, they will attack him, saying, "You are mad. You are not like us." Saint Antony the Great, or Saint Antony. um, yeah, this quote is just like I said previously, timely. It's just so timely. It's always just one of those things where this quote just reverberates throughout, well, throughout philosophy, throughout politics, throughout religion, and essentially throughout history. This is just one of those things where, obviously, as a saint, as a father of the church, held in pretty high regard, high esteem, and somebody that saw the world for what it is, for what it's becoming, and for what it may be. Much like the founding fathers of the United States, much like a lot of monarchs in history, or even you can take the good with the bad. Even the political philosophers, the just good old regular philosophers, um, religious philosophers, things, it's the whole realm, the whole gamut, if you will. And this could relate to the majority, and I'm probably speaking for the majority of America, who are just moderate and sick of hearing all the noise and what the political class is doing, or what they think they like to know that they're doing. Because the pontification that comes from that side is what can be said in our previous video that I made, that religion just doesn't understand, or politics just doesn't understand religion. And I think vice versa too, in a sense. And here is why Saint Anthony is backing up on this. He's saying that politics doesn't understand religion because of the persecutions that can happen and happened at a time when he was alive. And it has happened all the way throughout history, and has happened up until, it hasn't stopped. It hasn't stopped. So it's one of those things where it's now become more of a cyber kind of thing in the cyberspace realm, whereas back in the day it was actually physical, and it was actually it was life or death, just for proclaiming that you were a Christian, just for proclaiming if you were against a tyrannical regime, just for proclaiming if you were something that is our brethren of the other faiths, the Abrahamic faiths, because both Islam and Judaism have fell under persecution as well. And most people who are just moderate across the board in those religions are a lot like us. They just want to be left alone. They just want to be left alone. They don't want to be called they're crazy for believing what they believe. They don't want to be called different names for just having these things, and just having they're just persecuted for no reason. And there's good reasons to have doubts in all three parts of the Abrahamic religions, but there's also good reason to find ways to have a certain sense of fellowship. I'm not talking about ecumenicism or apostasy, just having some kind of coexistence. And I'm not talking about that bumper sticker, because different nations are for different people too. So that's good. But that's where it gets complicated and things would have to be sorted out. But instead of just calling them mad for something they believe in and not actually knowing what they believe in, then that's where it gets tricky. That's where the waters get muddied. And he's obviously speaking from a point to where the persecution was pretty heavy at the time for Christians, especially by Muslims in the Ottoman Empire, and this is way before the Ottoman Empire. I'm just wow. His time period was before that. So this would just be under the Persian Empire. And I mean, well, there you go. Persian Empire to Ottoman Empire. I mean, it didn't really have that much of a time gap in between it, but kind of two sides of the same coin. So on that one, where people are just being reactionary or just being something for the sake of being something without actually believing in it, and that is where saying you are mad, you are not like us is so poignant, because that's just you're being something for the sake of being something, just so you could feel fulfilled, kind of, or so you could just be a part of something because you don't feel good enough that you could be a part of the other side, or I don't know, some kind of guilt, maybe something or other. It's complicated for what people do, the things they do. It's usually for survival is the biggest one. But when it comes down to them just being vitriolic and just attacking people for no reason and just being spiteful just to be spiteful, then they aren't realizing what's in their own heart and what's realizing in their own mind and what they're trying to accomplish as far as getting an agenda across and getting some kind of retribution or some kind of reconciliation for what they're trying to accomplish. And that's where this whole thing gets muddied. This is where obviously it's been diluted throughout the ages, much like Christianity has been diluted throughout the ages. I mean, I know the traditions of the church now aren't like what they used to be, especially 2,000 years ago. So it's one of those things where you have to know the history, go back in time and see where the origin of these things do come from, because then you'll just be accusatory and persecutory and just all those things that aren't good for society. They aren't good for other people. They don't get arguments anywhere. There's no intellectual honesty there. It just becomes a bunch of name calling, and it just becomes a bunch of browbeating that doesn't do anything. And then you want to take something that isn't a religion and you want to replace it with a religion. So you'll just want to swap out one for the other, when it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way, because I mean, people are gonna believe what they want to believe, and that's good. That's all well and good. But since when did the minority of what the belief should be outweigh that majority, and then start name calling them and start vitriolically attacking them as extremists or as some kind of thing, you know? And I mean, don't get me wrong, it counterbalances itself, and it relays and it ping pongs itself off of the right and left all the time. So I'm not making an argument for one side or the other on that one, because I see the constant ping pong and the constant rhetoric just being shoveled back and forth, if you will. So it's there for that to be the pontification. And that's what it boils down to, is is seeking a different path and rising above it and seeing it for what it is and what it has become, because that is how the evolution of history has just repeated itself, and history repeats itself. And it's one of those things where the church fathers didn't want to be that repetition of history. They didn't want to be that part of it. And the same with the founding fathers, probably the same with the Greek philosophers, probably the same with um well, I mean, the Gnostic period and the Enlightenment and all that stuff and all those great thinkers. I mean, obviously there's problematic when it comes to Christianity, but you can't take away from what they thought and how they went about doing it. So without that, there's no progress to be made. There's no reaffirmations of the faith as I found it in their writings. But see, me just calling him mad and me just being persecutory or accusatory towards somebody like, I don't know, for instance, let's pick Nietzsche. Me just being persecutory and accusatory towards somebody like Friedrich Nietzsche, that would do a disservice to me, because if I were to never read what he wrote, and it would never reaffirm my beliefs as a Christian, then that would be tough to do, because he's one of those writers that make you think of things in different ways, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not that I'm completely deconstructing my beliefs and tearing them down. It's just thinking about different things in different ways. It's not taking away from my beliefs. It's not taking away from anybody else's beliefs. And see, this is where the enrichment of others is so valuable. This is where something like, I can reaffirm my faith through him and the church fathers and the patristic nectar that comes from the church fathers that have helped me understand with their infinite wisdom somebody like Nietzsche even more is just important. So just accusing him and calling him some kind of name would just do a disservice to the both of us. And he's one of the least controversial ones I could have picked. That is probably a good thing. But he's also kind of controversial too, which is kind of fun. So then you have to really realize where these things will get you, and instead of just accusing people of things, or just for being the sake of being something for something, is just how it shouldn't be. And that was a bit of a rant, but as you can see, that's how men will go mad. So when you see someone who is not mad, think to yourself, you are mad. You are not like us. So if they don't believe what you believe, then they're the crazy ones. Maybe it takes a step back and trying to find something like the patristic nectar that these church fathers are offering, or the timelessness and wisdom of their words that they are offering. Or maybe, if you live in America, instead of accusing the founding fathers for whatever it might be, instead of being ignorant of history or arrogant about your situation today, maybe it would be good to take a step back and realize why all that madness is around you and why you can't. And here we go. Maybe I'll take something else out of Dr. Peterson's hat. But maybe you should clean your own room and start cleaning out your own life before trying to be a revolutionary and or being an agent of radicalism and trying to figure out that there's something more. There's substance to this life, that you can benefit from other people's lives and what they've contributed, like a Saint Antony the Great, like a Saint Basil the Great, like what Saint Macarius the Great, like Saint Gregory of Nyssa, like Saint Paisos the Athonite, and maybe even throw in the modern day Peter Ayres, who's been really an awesome figure for not only the Orthodox Church, Christianity in general, and just the infinite wisdom that's carried on throughout the ages that the church fathers just have. So maybe it's one of those things where, it helps. It helps people out. And I know it's helped me out. And that's just all it's there for. So instead of calling people mad just because they don't believe what you believe, there's going to be a commonality, and there has to be a commonality, and there has to be a sense of retribution and reconciliation before there's an accusation or persecution.